we have Rick Levine here tonight to guide us through the planets and stars to tell us what's coming up in the month ahead. And let's hope it's better news than the last one.
I have Buddhist friends, Kevin, that call it the tyranny of hope, because it keeps one from the present moment. You know, if you're hopeful, you're off into the future, hoping it will get better. Greetings, we are here for Astrology Night. It is the first Wednesday of the month of May, in the merry month of May 2016, here at SoulFood Books, SoulFood Coffeehouse in Redmond, Washington. And we have some serious and significant stuff to talk about this evening. And we'll get to that in just a moment. I want to take a few moments, like I do, because we have so many people now that watch us on the internet. I like to just keep my schedule out there for everyone. And I just wanted to let you know of a few things coming up in my life that can be in your life, depending upon your volition. So the end of May, just in a few weeks, on Memorial Day weekend, we have NORWAC, that's the Northwest Astrology Conference, here in Seattle. It's actually down at the DoubleTree near the airport at SeaTac. And there's a few hundred people who gather there for the weekend, and we have speakers coming in from England, Europe, I guess England is kind of European, and all over the United States. It's a fascinating and family-oriented event. It's a lot of fun, and you can find more about it at NORWAC, that's NORWAC.net. That's in a few weeks, Memorial Day weekend. I am doing a 4-day workshop at Brighton Bush Hot Springs, and that'll be July 31st through August 3rd. I normally do the year ahead in the first week of January when it's cold and there's snow on the ground. Well, this is going to be midsummer, and it'll be luscious and lovely, and good food and hot tubs and a lot of planetary cosmic talk. The topic is the astrology of relationships, moving beyond Venus and Mars. And this is for either individuals, couples, or whatever kind of crazy relationship geometry you can muster up. Open to all. I skipped over Chicago mid-July. That'll be Saturday, July 9th for my Chicagoland friends. I'll be doing an all-day workshop for the Friends of Astrology, and that'll be entitled 12 Steps to Doing Better, 12 Practical Steps, 12 practical steps to doing better astrology or chart readings. And you can find out more about that by going to friendsofastrology.org. And that'll be in Chicago, actually, at the DoubleTree in Ulsa, near Chicago, suburb. Then we have in October 13th through the 17th, will be ISAR, the International Society for Astrological Research. This will be the granddaddy of the big conferences this year, although NORWAC may be more fun because it's family. Well, ISAR's family is just a global family. There'll be speakers there from all over the world. There'll be speakers there from all over Europe and Russia and Asia, South America. I'm sure I missed something, South Africa. That's the title of that conference is The Power of Forecasting. It's October 13th through the 17th, and it'll be a blast. Then next January, and this one may take some planning, so I'm talking about it far enough in advance. I'll be doing a workshop from January 20th through the 29th in Goa, India. And the workshop will be experiencing the spiritual dimensions of astrology. And this will be a full immersion, week, 8 days, put on by Evelyn Roberts, who puts on the Bali conferences. And this will be working in depth with me and your charts and the people in the workshop. And Goa is a very magical place, a little different than the rest of India. It's the kind of old hippie center, Ayurvedic medicine, yoga, massage, and we'll be on the beach in Goa. And you can find out more about that at Heaven and Earth Workshops. That's all one word. It's crazy to say that's all one word, but it is. heavenandearthworkshops.com, and look at the upcoming workshops, and that will be listed there. End of February next year will be the NCGR conference. That's the National Council for Geocosmic Research. That's going to be in Baltimore, February 16th through 19th. I'm going to be a busy boy at the beginning of next year. And then a year from now, a year from this week, in Costa Rica, May 6th through the 13th, on the beach. I have a theme going for 2016. It's on the beach. On the beach in Costa Rica, the conference will be called Co-Creating the Future, and this is being put on by Kaipacha, Tom Lisher. I don't know if any of you listened to the Pele Report. It's a weekly version of what I do monthly. Kaipacha and I are very different, but we both come from the same corner of the galactic neighborhood, and I'm thrilled to be participating with Kaipacha and Patricia Walsh and Maurice Fernandez and a few other astrologers from around the world, and that'll be next May. Okay, that's what's coming up in my life, and I hope to see you at some or any of those events. Now, so what season is it, folks?
Global warming.
You're all right. For those on the internet who didn't hear what was in the audience, there was spring, and it is, although it feels like summer, we're a good 4, 5, 6 weeks ahead in vegetation and weather, and so, which prompted some people to say we're in the season of global warming, although my environmentalist friends have called it global weirding. But there were a few other people who got the answer right that I was looking for, and that is we are in retrograde season, which leads me to this.
Yesterday, all my troubles seem so far away. Now it looks as though...
That's good enough. Stop. Does technology run away with itself?
Yesterday.
Stop. See, now that's a retrograde. You don't get it once, it just kind of keeps coming back. It's like eating garlic. That's a retrograde. So we are deep into retrograde season. I know this was part of the theme last month, and we talked about coming into retrograde season. Well, we are here. It is definitely the topic of the evening, and there are a few other topics that really make May an interesting month. And I know I often say this is an interesting month, but this is an interesting month. And part of the interest is the fact that for the first time in about 10 years, something that only occurs about 4% of the time, we have 5 planets retrograde, starting from the slowest moving working inward. We have Pluto retrograde, Saturn retrograde, Jupiter retrograde, Jupiter but not for long retrograde, Mars retrograde, and Mercury retrograde. And maybe, talking about this from the ones that matter the most, it's the other way out. We have Mercury retrograde, Mars retrograde, Jupiter, Saturn, and Pluto. And the reason for that is that when planets change speed, it's actually noticeable, because a planet that moves quickly, when it slows down to go retrograde, goes over an area of the heavens, and this of course is apparent only from Earth's point of view. The planets don't really change direction. But when a planet turns retrograde from Earth's point of view, it looks like it's slowing down and revisiting areas of the sky where it already visited, and then when it turns direct, it goes over those areas again. And what that does is it takes a transit, like Mercury, which moves normally nearly a degree or 2 every day. Mercury is the fastest moving of the planets up there. And so Mercury, when it's really moving quickly, can move up almost 2 degrees a day. When it retrogrades, though, it slows down to holding the same degree when it's changing directions, to holding the same degree for several days in a row. So that degree, if that is something that is important in your chart, it becomes hugely more important because the planet gains, if I use the word gravity, I don't mean it in the like dropping something, gravity, what's the right word? Heaviness, weightiness. But that still is like, a substance. It becomes more enduring. And in fact, if a planet moves over a point in your chart that's sensitive, and then retrogrades back over that point a few weeks later, and then retrogrades back over it again a few weeks or a few months later, that energy of normally fast, whimsical, changing, on-the-move Mercury becomes more like Saturn. Because it's heavier, because it holds the energy. You know, the real reason why planets feel differently as they're moving around the sky is they move at different speeds. You know, the moon, which goes around the zodiac, around the Earth once a month, becomes so familiar that it doesn't matter where the moon is. We remember, oh yeah, I'm in that mood. And so the moon becomes, and for women who bleed, that becomes oh, I'm at that time of my month. It's like maybe you forget about it, but you begin to get signals, and it's, I've been here before. Now contrast that with Pluto, which only hits a spot in your chart once every 3 or 4 lifetimes. Pluto takes 250 years, 243, 44 years, to go around once, which means that wherever Pluto is moving and retrograding and directing over, which means that Pluto can take a year or 2 or 3 to be done with a particular area in your chart, it's like having someone coming over for dinner once a month for years, and then one night they come over for dinner and stay for 2 years. And then leave. It's the same motion. Do you understand what I'm saying? So, we have definite retrograde energy going on. We have Jupiter, which turned retrograde back in January, Saturn, which turned retrograde the end of March, Mars turned retrograde just a few weeks ago, mid-April, April 17th, and then Pluto turned retrograde within a day on April 18th, and then Mercury turned retrograde just a week ago on April 28th. So we have all these planets moving backward, and what does that mean? Well, you find a lot of fear and negativity aimed at retrograde planets in astrology. Mercury communication, Mercury goes retrograde, and you hear things like miscommunication, mixed up directions, lost items, misplaced things, misunderstandings, and all of that can be true, but it's not a negative unto itself, and we'll come back to that in a moment. Mars retrograde is like Mercury retrograde, except having to do with intellectual and mental functions. It has to do with physical functions. So you hear about, on Mars retrograde, of people making major wrong decisions, going in wrong directions. You hear about people having accidents because of carelessness. I got together with someone yesterday, and due to a series of miscommunications, we got together an hour or so later than we originally planned. And I'm not saying that that doesn't happen anytime, but it seems that when planets are retrograde, these things tend to happen more. Now the question is why? And why aren't retrograde planets negative? Here's the deal. And I know you've heard, some of you have heard me say this before, and you'll hear me say it again. When a planet is close to Earth in its normal movement, as it gets closer to Earth, we lose perspective, and it looks like it's going backwards. Like a car next to you that as you just start to, just start to roll forward, you look out the window and you think the car next to you is going backwards. It's not. It's loss of perspective. It's like being in a subway or train going past the train next to you and it looks like it's going backwards, but you're just going forward faster. So when a planet is retrograde, it means astronomically that it must be closer to Earth than it is in other points in its cycle. And the theory is that when a planet is closer to Earth, its signal is louder, like a radio station. When you drive along and you're listening to a radio and you get to that spot where you have to tune a little more carefully to get it, and then you get to the spot where you can't hear it anymore. When a planet's retrograde, it's overamping, it's louder. And because of that, we try to normalize it. I always use the image of giving amphetamines or amphetamine-like drugs to hyperactive children. Why is that? They're already hyperactive. And so we give them drugs that make them even more hyperactive, and then it shuts down. And that's what happens when planets go retrograde. They're too much, and so we deny them, we cut them off, we send them away. It's like Mars now getting closer to Earth. Mars is the planet of assertion and aggression. It's the god of war. Mars is useful. It's how we get anywhere. We employ Mars to go. Mars is about the fire, the energy of moving forward, going anywhere, doing anything. Mars is the red, the angry red planet. Mars is the red in red blood cells. It's energy. So if that energy gets pumped up, and we start acting more assertive, more aggressive, more belligerent, more combative, what happens? Icky stuff. People start hitting back. Yikes. People tell us to cool it. It's like we become too much. And so what happens is that we learn over the years, because Mars goes retrograde every other year, nearly every other year. It goes retrograde short of every other year. And Mars, when it goes retrograde for 2.5 months, 2 months. And so that energy is something that if you're 40 years old, you've experienced that in your life 20 times already. And you begin to, even though you don't necessarily logically do this, you begin to remember, oh, when I get too hot too fast, it never works out right. So I'm just going to suck it in. Cool. Except for the fact that when we take an emotion and we deny it, we then bump into it as a projection. Are you with me here? This is the problem with retrogrades. Is when Mercury is retrograde, the intellect is speeded up. It's like you can visualize yourself as kind of like having all these wires, and whether they're visible or not, we have all these kind of connections to the outer world, almost like bridges and freeways and telephone wires. And then along comes Mercury retrograde, and all the wires are carrying more traffic, more data. And so the wires can heat up and fray. The bridges can collapse under the pressure. When shit goes wrong when Mercury is retrograde, it doesn't mean that anything's going wrong. What it means is that we need to develop the structure and the integrity of our communication to bear the extra weight, or the extra volume, or the extra noise, or the extra traffic. You with me? So now that we're in this incredible Mercury retrograde, Mars retrograde, Jupiter retrograde, Saturn retrograde, and Pluto retrograde stage, we got a lot going on. And because of that, it's real tempting to go into denial. And that's when the problems begin. Because if we shut it off, then stuff begins happening out there that seems out of our control. but it's out of our control because it's our stuff and we're not dealing with it internally. So that is a key lesson for this month. And remember, Mercury, which was the last planet to turn retrograde, but the fastest retrograde, meaning that Mercury turns retrograde for about 3 weeks, 3 or 4 times a year. So Mercury, which turned retrograde on April 28th, Mercury turns direct on May 22nd. And we're going to come back to that May 20, 21st, 22nd period of time, because May has a split personality. Okay, we're coming from Taurus, which has no personality. No, I don't really mean that.
Hey, come on.
I can say that because Jeff isn't here to defend himself. Or maybe he is. Okay. I'll be good. May, for the first 3 weeks of May, the sun is in Taurus. The sun is in Taurus now. We have a lot of Taurus going on, and we have more than a lot of Taurus going on. We have Mercury retrograde in Taurus, the sun and Venus all in Taurus, and they're all throughout the month moving in and out of a grand trine that we'll look at in a moment a little bit more, but we'll just look at here the chart for this evening, and we can see that the Sun, Mercury, and Venus, all in Taurus, are forming, that's these blue lines, 1/3 of a circle, a trine with Jupiter and the North Node, but Jupiter most importantly, retrograde in Virgo, and Pluto retrograde in Capricorn. Taurus, Virgo, Capricorn, that's the Earth grand trine, that's the Earth planet. Earth in astrology has to do with sensibility, the senses. That which you can touch, taste, feel, smell. The Earth signs are practical. Think down to Earth. Now a grand trine is a pattern that holds its energy. There's, in ancient astrology, grand trines were considered to be a blessing. Trine's good, square's bad. In modern astrology, it's not that simple, because trines hold a pattern in motion, and it can be a bad pattern. It can be a destructive pattern, an addictive pattern. It doesn't matter. But the trine basically stabilizes energy. So it's hard to get things done when there are major trines or grand trines, especially in Earth, especially with the sun in Taurus, is that obstinate Taurus. It's that stubborn. It's the, I think of it as Newton's third law. Taurus is an object at rest, tends to stay at rest unless acted on by an outside force. And an object in motion tends to stay in motion unless acted on by an outside force. It's the try to get the Taurus who's eating a sandwich, watching TV, off the couch to the party or to whatever you have next. Great. Once you got him or her out, try to get him home. It's like once they're doing something, they're in motion. They don't want to. It's hard for a Taurus. It's inertia. It's mass that has inertia that's either not moving or moving, and it's hard for it to change directions. And the clash between Taurus and Gemini, Taurus is stability, inertia, stubbornness, obstinacy, holding one's position, maintaining the status quo, and Gemini is status quo. Who the hell wants that? Gemini is it's Mercury. It's moving, it's back and forth, it's interaction, it's interchanging energy. So when the sun moves from Taurus to Gemini on the 20th, in a way that's a catalyst for a much deeper change going on that has to do with the Taurus energy that's kind of stuck in this wonderful grand trine that's allowing us to enjoy the denial of this crazy retrograde period. But once the sun moves into Gemini and the energy begins to change, it's followed almost immediately by a full moon from Sagittarius to Gemini. We'll get here in the chart in just a minute. And it's also then followed by Mercury moving from retrograde to direct on the 22nd. So that period of time really is the catalyzing period from holding on to what we think we have or what we like or what's working to being thrust into an era in our own lives and culturally and socially into a much more dynamic and changeful period that shifts the energy from the stability of Earth into the changeability and the mutability of the mutable signs, which are Gemini, Virgo, Sagittarius, and Pisces. And we'll be having planets in each of those, and that will be the talk for June, because we have a crazy mutable energy coming up that really is building from May 20th, but all the way up and through the middle of June. So it'll be pretty interesting. Okay, so let's back up and look at some astrology here and take this day by day. We right now tonight, first Wednesday of the month of May, we are just coming off of a pattern from last night. The Sun here in mid-Taurus, let's back this up a day. And back this up a day. So the Sun yesterday at 13, 14 Taurus made an exact trine with Jupiter. And you see this blue triangle here? We have kind of this is the grand trine that began when Mercury, moving through Taurus a few weeks ago, lined up with where the Sun is now. And Mercury formed a trine with Jupiter and Pluto. In fact, Jupiter was an exact trine with Pluto. Jupiter's now retrograding. The Sun comes through that point, Venus comes through that point, Mercury backs through that point, and then Mercury goes direct through that point. And each of these points are part of a pattern that is holding with this grand trine that I referenced before. Are you with me here? This is the piece that is both attractive, enjoyable, yummy, and dangerous. Dangerous, why? Because it can make us lazy. It can make us think that we don't really need to do the work that we really need to do. We don't really need to make the changes that we need to make. And whatever we don't do now, we will pay for in late May and on through June, and we will realize, crap, we blew that opportunity. We actually had time back in May to do this right, and now we're trying to play catch up. So that is really part of the underlying lesson for the merry month of May. So we had the Sun trining Jupiter, and again, too much of a big thing is not necessarily a good thing. I think of Mae West, who actually once said, too much of a good thing is a good thing. I'm not sure it's true. Look at the Indiana primary yesterday. You know, we have, and we'll talk presidential politics next month or the month after. There's plenty of time, unfortunately. But the Sun trining Jupiter is somewhat, it's somewhat part of a grand trump. Because Jupiter is bombastic. It's full of itself. It's gassy. It's inflated. Jupiter is bigger than big. Jupiter is too much. Do you understand what I'm saying? And so we had the Sun yesterday trining Jupiter, and it bringing into the trine to Pluto, and we may have experienced some of that. With, you know, Trump being the only candidate now left in the presidential Republican side of things. Okay. So, if we watch the Sun, which is now at 14 degrees, we bring it up today, one more day, we'll bring it to 14, almost 15 degrees. Now remember, Jupiter's at 13 degrees of Earth, Virgo, and Pluto is at 17 degrees of Earth, Capricorn. So watch as that Sun moves 1 degree, roughly 1 degree a day. The Sun now at 15, then the Sun at 16, and then the Sun is at exactly the same degree as Pluto. So even though if we were looking at exact trines, the Sun was trine Pluto, the Sun was trine Jupiter exactly on May 3rd, and it'll be trine Pluto exactly on May 7th. But the fact of the matter is that trine energy never really goes away. It just deepens, it intensifies. It goes from expansive, opportunistic, bigger than life Jupiter to Pluto. There's more going on here that meets the eye. There's something deeper. And so I think that we need to pay attention to this energy that's just developing. The Sun trines Pluto exactly on May 7th. But in between there, we have the new moon, and I'm going to back this up. And there we have the new moon in Taurus on Friday. The new moon in Taurus is actually at 12:29 p.m. here in the West Coast. This chart is actually for 3 o'clock on the East Coast, but you can see that the Sun and the Moon are both in Taurus, and they're kind of cozied in between Venus on one side and Mercury on the other. Even though that's a Mercury retrograde, that whole new moon is harmonized and trined with the Pluto and the Jupiter, and in a way this new moon on Friday midday really signifies the entire first half, or first three quarters, first 2/3, I guess is more correct, of the month of May, in that it really has that stability, the earthiness, the practicality, the simplicity, the bucolic pastoral kind of loveliness of Ferdinand the bull hanging out in a spring field that's green with daisies and dandelions, and just kind of enjoying the yummy energy. And that's what this is really all about. Now we do have a little bit of a fly buzzing around. This is now back to Ferdinand, where the fly comes and kind of, it does this with its tail, and the fly comes back again, and Ferdinand just wants to enjoy the senses, and the fly just keeps coming back, and finally Ferdinand begins to get angry. And finally it's the Taurus, the neck thickens and the nostrils flare, and he gets angry and wants, and so what happens is that we have a fly in the pastoral field, in the ointment, so to speak, and that fly is actually a taste of what will happen when the Sun moves into Gemini, and that has to do with Jupiter opposing Neptune and squaring Mars and Saturn. So you see this mutable square, the mutable signs, the changeable signs. The mutable signs are the season-ending signs. Cardinal are the initiation, the beginning signs. That's the Aries, Cancer, Libra, Capricorn that start each season. And then the fixed signs, Taurus, fixed mid-spring, Leo, mid-summer. What am I missing? Thank you. Scorpio, mid-autumn, and Aquarius, mid-winter. And then as we move into the mutable signs, we begin to get the buzz for whatever the next season is. So here, as the Sun moves into Gemini, we're going to get the buzz for summer already, but we already have 3 planets in, actually 4 planets, because Saturn and Mars are tracking together in Sagittarius. And so this is the fly in the ointment. This is the how much is enough and how much is too much. The Jupiter expansion, the Saturn contraction, the Mars and Sagittarius seeing the distance, seeing the goal, seeing the horizon, having a plan, wanting to go there, but not being able to get out of the starting gate, or having its shoelaces untied, and not knowing how to tie them, or in some way that Mars retrograde is all dressed up and ready to go, but you can't get there. And so we have this frustration building behind this everything's okay and it's wonderful, this new moon where everything is magical and easy. So in summary, this new moon setting the stage for the rest of the month of May, up until the full moon in Sagittarius on the 21st, we have this sense of we can fall back onto those things that work. Because, like in trines, the energy's there, it's reliable, it works. And if we try to make change, it's difficult to break out of the pattern because the pattern works. Even if it's not an excellent pattern for us long term. So we need to pay attention to that. That's the new moon in Taurus. The day after the new moon, the sun trines Pluto, and remember this new moon really is trine Jupiter and Pluto in that grand trine. But the following day then, the sun trines Pluto. Whoops, let's go back to a day at a time here. Come on, we can do this. There it is. The sun trines Pluto. And then what happens over the next couple of days, technically on May 9th, Jupiter stations and begins its direct phase. The slower moving planets are not as obvious when they change from direct to retrograde or retrograde to direct, but there is a subtle energy, and like homeopathy, sometimes the most subtle energies are the ones that can have the most profound effects. So we can't just pass them off as being unimportant. And as Jupiter begins moving forward, there's a deeper rumbling of energy moving ahead again. And yet Jupiter is premature in this because we still have Mercury and Mars to follow in their direct motions. Mercury then turns direct on May 22nd, as I mentioned earlier, and Mars doesn't turn direct until June 29th. So we're now moving ahead, and as we move ahead, we can see that Mercury moving backwards, Mercury retrograding, actually joins up with the Sun on, oh, I lost the date there. Mercury joins the Sun. It was just right here. Help me, don't help me. Mercury conjuncts the Venus, it conjuncts the Sun. There it is. Nope. Well, it looks like it's the 9th. Oh, there it is. It is the 9th. It's the 9th. I was just looking at the wrong place. So when this is like the halfway point, although it's not halfway in time, it's halfway in the process of the retrograde phase, because Mercury now retrograding across the Sun, meaning that Mercury comes between the Earth and the Sun. And so there's a focus between the Sun, our consciousness, our will, and Mercury, our communication. The problem is, though, that Mercury can get lost or burned up into the Sun, and Mercury, because it's inside the Sun, it's hard to get those ideas and thoughts out past the Sun. So it's an interesting little point here, but it's still communication oriented, and it's still tied up into this grand trine. Now the other thing that's going on at this point in time is that Venus is coming into the grand trine slowly, and it's making its trine with Jupiter, followed, and that Venus trine Jupiter is on May 13th actually. And then the Venus trine Jupiter is on the 10th, and Venus trine Pluto is on the 13th. So you can see here, Venus is coming into the trine to Pluto, and then if we just look at that Venus, it'll come up to the 17-degree point, and then Venus will trine Pluto, and that'll be on the 13th. So again, we have now Mercury now backing up to Venus, because Mercury is going across each of them. So the communication piece here is really important, and yet it's also really important to only communicate about those things that are easy. And that's the trick, that's the trap. That's the attraction. Venus is harmonizing with Pluto by the 13th, and that says love, attraction, desire, feelings, emotions are deeper, they're more intense. And Mercury lining up with Venus says, oh, and it's easy to talk about these intense feelings, but because it's all in Earth, it's easy to talk about them only in the nice way. To make those things that are deep, dark, dirty, hard, into something that is not as meaningful, but nice. So again, that's the trap of this grand trine that we need to pay attention to throughout this period of time. As we move onward, we get to the 20th, and this is where the shift occurs. On the 20th, the Sun becomes the first of the planets to move from Taurus into Gemini. Remember, Gemini is about bipolarity. And I don't mean this in a psychological, clinical definition of bipolar. I mean that with Gemini, it's the twins. You get this and that simultaneously. You get hot and cold. You get this job and that job. You get this person and that person. There's a sense of it's Robert Frost's two roads diverged in a wood one day. Or what is that what it is? Two roads diverged. Yeah, so whatever. Thank you, Robert Frost. The two roads. Yes, and I took the one less traveled by? Okay. Well, this is more like a quantum meeting of the fork in the road, because with the Gemini energy, we take both of them. Gemini sees no reason to choose this or that, because Gemini is about intellect, it's about mental, it's not about the earth practicality. You can't really walk down physically both paths at the same time, but you can take them both in the mind at the same time. And that's the magic of Gemini. It has to do with holding the bipolar position. It's not this, it's this and that. It's up and down, it's yes and no. And Gemini does not need to make those choices because it lives in a universe where reality is like a radio. And so you can just tune this one. This isn't reality, this is what I'm listening to. But now I'm bored. I'm going to tune to that station. And so Gemini allows us to tune in and out of different frequencies, because whether we're putting it in that kind of language or not, Gemini, whether you're a Gemini sun sign or planets in Gemini, or the time of year when the sun goes into Gemini, and all of a sudden the things that took creation in Aries, when things began to grow in Taurus, began to develop stalks and stems and stability. In Gemini, there's flower and there's pollen in the air like there is now already here in Seattle. But the fact of the matter is there's buzzing things and things are flying around, because in Gemini it's noisy. It's everything is vibration, everything is moving. And the sun's movement into Gemini is the key, because it will be followed by Mercury direct or Venus direct into Gemini. Venus goes into Gemini on May 24th. And then Mercury going direct doesn't move into Gemini until June 12th. But all the energy of Gemini is beginning to be stirred up. Now, why is this so important? Well, what's important is the sun is like the battery. It's the solar powering of the entire system. And as the sun moves from Taurus to Gemini, even though Mercury is still in this intellectual, practical grand trine with Jupiter and Pluto, the fact is that all of a sudden consciousness moves into the realm of Gemini, where the sun is now moving toward an opposition to Mercury. Can you see that?
Mars.
I'm sorry, thank you, whoever said, oh, yeah, thanks, Mars. And so Mars retrograding has been in Sagittarius, and Mars is heading back towards Scorpio. It's like it didn't get enough. There's something we forgot in those deeper, more intense emotional realms. Mars retrograding back into Scorpio actually hits Scorpio on May 27th. But before it does, the sun moves into Gemini. It opposes Mars, and then we have the full moon in Sagittarius just a day later. This is on the 21st, and the full moon in Sagittarius is conjuncting Mars. Now, this is a pretty powerful statement. There's nothing. The new moon in Taurus was totally sweet and yummy and grand triney and nicey and sensual and holding the status quo. But now with the moon conjuncting Mars in Sagittarius, that Mars is already hot and fiery and bothered, and Mars is just a day away from its time when it's the closest to Earth. Because when the outer planets are directly opposed to Earth, they have to be retrograde. Mars is retrograde. And just a day later, when Mars is exactly opposed the Sun, Mars opposes the Sun, that what happens is that the assertion, aggression, anger, the impulsive, the redness, whatever that is being fed by the moon, which are our emotions, lining up with it. And so this full moon is incredibly dynamic. We feel ourselves off into the future, and we're totally frustrated that we're not there yet. And although by exact degree, we're still a little bit away from this grand mutable cross that will develop through early mid-June, we're getting a first taste of it as the Sun moves into Gemini, opposes Mars, and the full moon opposes the Sun. But over the next 2 weeks, even though this is June, we'll just take a quick picture here. We'll go there, because watch the Sun as it moves over 2 weeks, a degree a day, until it's at 15 degrees of Gemini, and it is also then squaring Neptune, Jupiter, and opposing Saturn. So watch this triangle kind of shift. If I can make this happen. There we go. So we're doing this a day at a time, and the Sun is now at 7, 8. Venus is tracking pretty close to the Sun through this time. But you see now we have that grand square, and even though this isn't until June 1st, it will be here on June 1st, on Wednesday night. But that grand square is pretty intense, and you can see that grand square holds for several days through early June, and it's very powerful, and it's very different than the grand trine that we're working with now. Got it? All right, let's go back. You know, and that mutable grand square, in a way, is also being fed by another sequence which we've talked about in the past, and we need to bring up again now. So we come up to the new moon. Let's come back to, the full moon on May 21st. And that full moon, highlighted by the assertion, aggression, direction of Mars. This is a day when we can lose our temper for all the wrong reasons, or we can actually deny our feelings and have someone close to us lose his or her temper and come at us because we're not being honest and truthful with our feelings, with our emotions. So the dance here on this full moon in Sagittarius is to express our feelings, but to do it consciously in a way that does not blame, does not project, does not go, "You're a jerk, and that makes me pissed off." Instead, it's, "I'm feeling pissed off because when you do that, it reminds me of this that happens in my life." In other words, we need to take responsibility for our own reactions and feelings and do it in a way that doesn't create a conflict or a, what's the word I'm looking for? A what?
Escalation?
An escalation of differences of opinion that are absolutely trivial. Because with this full moon, everything will be a hook and will be a fish looking for the thing to explode, to nuke, to melt down, to get angry over, to create anger, to create hostility. And you watch in the world theater of events, the political scene, I'm suggesting that around the middle end of May, as if the presidential race in this country can't already get more bizarre, I read something on the internet today. William Pitt, the guy who writes for Truth Out. No, anyhow, he basically wrote a brilliant piece just today after the primary in Indiana yesterday. That was basically, he likened this presidential campaign as a presidential campaign on LSD. Not that I know anything about that. Okay, so we have this full moon, which in some ways is setting the stage for what's coming next. But behind it and right along with it, we have Mercury is holding its position. You remember Mercury now on the full moon is already stationed, because the day after the full moon, Mercury goes from retrograde to turning direct. And Mercury is holding this position in the midst of this grand trine, trining Jupiter and trining Pluto. And so what's really interesting is that while we're getting all the noise from this full moon, Mercury is saying, yes, but intellectually, mentally, I'm holding this position, I know what's right, and we can make it work if I simply, quietly, stubbornly hold on to my position. Now, Mercury turns direct on the 22nd, which begins to move. Remember, Mercury is the planet related to Gemini. The sun's just moved into Gemini. Now, Mercury, the planet of Gemini, is going forward again, and that loosens up all the stuff that's been, in some ways, tied up in knots or feeling resistant over the past 3 weeks, going back to when Mercury turned retrograde on April 28th. So we have energy loosening up and moving forward. We have this incredible full moon in Sagittarius, and that is on the 22nd and 23rd. And then on the 24th, we have Mercury moving into a position on the 24th. I'm sorry, we have Venus. We're not there yet. There we go. Mercury, Venus on the 24th, moving into Gemini, increasing that Gemini energy. Now with Venus there, Venus is related to Taurus. Venus back in Taurus was holding some of that grounded energy. Now with Venus moving into Gemini, we're beginning to say, well, this isn't so bad. I can kind of get into this. There's change happening. I'm liking it. I'm looking forward to it. But the first thing that Venus does when she moves into Gemini is she opposes Mars. Now, Venus and Mars are the cosmic lovers. Venus is what you like, and Mars is how you get it, or get to it. Venus is the attraction and the desire that pulls us toward, and Mars is the physical side. Venus is the feminine, Mars is the masculine. And so, in some way, this Venus-Mars opposition is not as bad as it might sound, because oppositions are opposite sides of the same coin. And so we get this glimpse. Again, in some ways, this is holding the energy of the Sagittarius full moon, because even though the moon's moved on from Sagittarius into Capricorn, we still get this opposition from Gemini to Sagittarius, but now from what we like. We like the idea of something, we like the interaction, the light and easy, the Gemini, the noisy, the cocktail party chitter chatter, the cleverness, and yet Mars is saying, that's okay, but we need something more. We need to have a goal, we need to know where we're going, we need to know where the horizon is and how we're going to get there. And in the midst of all of this, we have building the third and final square between expansive Jupiter and contractive Saturn, which is part of this mutable T-square, that's 3 points on a square, that over the following week or two will involve 4 points as the Sun and Venus come into it. So, let's talk about this for a moment. Jupiter, which we've talked about a lot in these monthly talks, Jupiter is the magnifying lens of the zodiac. It makes wherever it is seem bigger, better, more. Jupiter is expansive. Jupiter looks at wherever it's at, and you see the possibility. Someone used the word, Kevin, in introducing me, said something about, I hope this month is better. hope is a great Jupiterian word, because it's that hope, that the possibility, the potential, that Jupiter basically creates the situations that we actually then grow into reality. You know, when we hope something is better, when we dream about something, when we imagine it, that actually lays the framework for things to become real. So it's not that Jupiter is bad, it's just that it's a bit tricky to manage, because Jupiter makes things look better than they are. Which is okay if we then work with it. The problem is that, well, the good news is that Mercury is harmonizing with Jupiter, and they're still both harmonizing with Pluto. So Jupiter, even though it's in Virgo, where it's expansive but in a narrowing sign, it's working right now in a practical way. And then that Jupiter bumps into an exact square, 13 degrees of Virgo to 13 degrees of Sagittarius. These slower moving outer planet aspects often happen in threes because of the retrograde motion. And Jupiter squared Saturn on August 3rd, 2015, the beginning of August, last summer. It then Jupiter squared Saturn again on March 23rd. And it's virtually been in that, close enough to that square until now, when it squares it the third and final time on May 26th. So that we've been in this pattern of Jupiter going, yeah, bigger, more, this is okay. And Saturn going, I don't think so, you're not ready, you can't do this. Jupiter saying, well, let's just turn the volume up a little bit more. And Saturn going, no, you can't, it's too loud already, turn the volume down. And so we have this expansion and contraction, and I think it was last August, and this is, I'm sure, still up on YouTube. Last August, I spent much of the evening here talking about peristalsis. Anyone remember that? Yeah. Peristalsis is what happens in the digestive system that moves food along. It's the boa constrictor swallowing the mouse, and you see the lump, and then you see it kind of being moved along. Peristalsis is alternating waves of expansion and contraction. You understand what I'm saying? It's how when we swallow, there's a contraction that moves down along, and it's followed by expansion behind it. And the same thing happens in our intestines. And the same thing happens in our daily lives, in our political spectrum, in the stock market. This peristaltic wave of Jupiter expansion, Saturn contraction. Jupiter expansion, Saturn contraction can make it difficult if we're trying to hold on to the status quo. But it doesn't work that way. And if we understand that there's always this constancy of not enough, too much, not enough, too much, expand, contract, go for it, do it, pull back, don't do it. This kind of Jupiter-Saturn optimistic, pessimistic kind of view, this is how we make the most out of this square. And I think that this sits behind a lot of what's going on through this year so far and up until the end of May, when this reaches a peak, and we may see it in our individual lives where we need to make decisions. Am I going to go ahead with this and put more time, money, effort, energy into it, whether it's a business, a project, a relationship, a whatever, or am I going to kind of pull back and let this one pass? And I think that if you look in your lives at these larger decisions that you may have begun to entertain last summer that are still with you, this might fit into this expansion, contraction, Jupiter-Saturn square that plays on through by the end of the month. Now, on May 27th, remember Mars, which was in its direct opposition to both the Sun and Venus just a few days, come on, there we go. Hello. Just a few days prior, Mars has been inching backwards, and as we follow that Mars moving backwards, on May 27th, you can see that Mars retrogrades from Sagittarius back into Scorpio. All right, now remember, last year we had Saturn in Scorpio. It moved into Sagittarius. We began to look further ahead in our lives, and then we realized, well, we weren't done with some of the hard work. Saturn retrograded back into Scorpio. Now Mars is doing the same. If we follow this timing of this, Mars actually entered Scorpio in January of, Mars entered Scorpio in January of this year. But Mars spends about 2 months in each sign, and on March 5th, Mars entered Sagittarius. Theoretically, March 5th, April 5th, May 5th, on May 5th, Mars should have been leaving Sagittarius and heading into Capricorn, but it turned retrograde. So on March 5th, Mars moved into Sagittarius and the heavens opened up. We could see a little farther. Our bigger ideas and plans began to make more sense. Mars turned retrograde on April 17th and Mars backs into Scorpio. Mars backs into Scorpio on, where did it go? On May 27th. Now, what this means is that from May 27th until Mars turns direct on June 29th, and moves back into Sagittarius on August 2nd, we have another few months of having to deal with that emotional intensity of Mars in Scorpio that often brings up issues of jealousy, of survival, of passion, of ownership, of either ideas or people and relationships. And so the energy intensifies here. And we get this by the end of the month as Mars backs back into, is that right? Backs into, as Mars backs into Scorpio again on the 27th. Now on the 30th we get the last hit of Mercury trining Pluto. Let's move this, is that right? Yeah. We get the last hit of Mercury, which is now moved direct through this grand trine one more time. And it's now trines Pluto on the very end of the month. And then, interestingly enough, by the end of May, we're kind of done. That grand trine begins to dissipate pretty quickly. And we'll see that kind of wane as the Earth status quo, practical, simplistic, earthbound grand trine turns more and more into this. We got to change, we got to follow through with what the ideas were. We're in a new terrain now. It's already been initiated. There's no going back. I need to make the adjustments that I need to make in order to survive in the new lay of the land. So, it's quite a month, and interestingly enough, it's a transition month, even though it's hard to find the progress when so many planets are going backwards. The key to May is understanding that when there are larger currents, fighting them exhausts you, and therefore you run out of the energy that you'll need when the tide is going your way. In other words, if you set your ship into the harbor to go out on a journey while the tide is coming in, you're rowing against the tide for 6 or 8 hours to get out of the harbor because the tide's coming in, and by the time you hit open sea, when you need your strength and energy, you're exhausted. Compare that with putting your ship or your boat or your rowboat or your kayak into the harbor, into the water, as the tide is going out. You don't have to work at all. You can just guide and steer, and then when you get out into open water, you have the energy, you have the resources to do what you need to do, rather than being exhausted when you need it. Do you understand the image? So, when planets are retrograde, our tendency is to buck the tide. Why? Because the planet's closer to Earth. We feel like, I have more energy than ever. Mars is retrograde, it's close to Earth. I have the power to make this right. Mercury, retrograde. I can make a good decision. I'm going out and buying a car this afternoon. You know, boom. When you do things that are reactive or compensating for the fact that the energy is pushing against you, we can push too hard, and that's what gets us into trouble. I'm not saying to lay back and, put on your, suntan lotion and go hang out in the Earth Grand Trine for the month. But I am saying that we can use our energy through May in a way that builds our energy, prepares us so that we're ready for this grand square in June, and so that we're ready by the end of the month as everything moves into Gemini, as the sun moves into Gemini, as we get that full moon, as we get the last of the 3 Jupiter square Saturns, that rather than feeling exhausted and we can't even walk another step, we're then ready to engage it and to make our life go in the direction that we want it to go. So, it's crazy out there. Be careful, and remember, love does trump hate. Thank you all.